episode. I love it. Um, so I want to start with the path that led you to the 50 best. So, like, I would assume a man of your talents had many options. What was it that drew you to that particular opportunity?
That's very kind of you to say. So, what drew me to the opportunity? I actually became the editor of Restaurant Magazine, which was the originator, the original source of the world's 50 best restaurants list many years ago, 22 years ago, in fact. That magazine launched the list, and I didn't join then. I joined about 2010, so that's 15 years ago. 15 years ago, and I joined the magazine, but part of the reason I joined the magazine was because it had the world's 50 best restaurants attached to it. I'd long been a fan of the list, so I came from outside, but knew that this magazine had this list attached to it that was very special and very interesting. And I saw an opportunity as well to grow that. In the years since, we've separated the two businesses, so we're still owned by the same media company. We're owned by a private media company, but Restaurant Magazine is no longer part of the world's 50 best restaurants, and vice versa. They run independently. But there was always an excitement around a list of the greatest restaurants in the world, both from a consumer perspective, but also from a business perspective.
What's kept you there? Because you've been there for more than a decade now. So, like,
Yeah,
what's kept your attention all this time?
I think it's been ever evolving and growing. So for the first number of years until 2013, certainly, there was only one ranking per year, the world's 50 best restaurants, the original, the OG. Um, but then we started launching regional rankings in Asia and in Latin America. Latterly, we've launched them in Middle East and North Africa, and we will soon launch it in North America. We also expanded into the bars world and launched a whole host of rankings in the bars world, and more recently in hotels and vineyards. So it's been growing and changing over that period. So therefore, I'm lucky enough that my job has never changed, never stayed the same, and been constantly changing.
And who would you say the dedication is to? So, like you look at James Beard, like James Beard is all about just being dedicated to the small independent restaurants. So like is your focus like do you serve the restaurants or do you feel like you serve the consumer base and it's more
It's a,
about
it's
informing them?
yeah, it's a double whammy. We do both. So I guess our first responsibility is to create a credible guide for food loving consumers or drinks cocktail loving consumers or hotel loving travelers across the world. That's the first guide. But the events that we create, where we bring people together to announce the ranking and to have a whole bunch of stuff going on around that announcement over now built to sort of 5 or 6 days on some occasions. That's a restaurant community piece of work. So that's the second part, but no less important, really, which is bringing the restaurant world together, the hospitality world together, to celebrate its achievements. Everyone, as you know, in the hospitality world tends to work extremely hard and extremely dedicated and long hours and antisocial hours and so forth. So to give those people the chance to get together, often internationally from different people from around the world to get together, is really special. And we've really found almost by chance how strong that sense of community is, and really built on that as part of the DNA of what we do.
Well, and I would say that being on the world's 50 best is a nice to have pre-pandemic. But post-pandemic, I think that the rules changed, right? The stakes are just much higher. It's hard to own a restaurant that is the best in anything and be financially solvent. So, like when the 50 best shines a light on that restaurant, what it does is it aids in new customer acquisition. It reminds people why the restaurant exists and gives people a great reason to come back. So the stakes are just incredibly high. And then go ahead.
Well, yeah, I think that's a really interesting point because we understand that if you make it onto the list, that's really great for business. I mean, that's a
For
fact. Okay.
sure.
But it's not just about that. If we're shining a light on the hospitality sector as a whole and getting people to talk about it and write about it in the media and post about it on social media, that helps everybody in the hospitality trade, we hope. It's both an aspiration for people in the hospitality trade who haven't made it onto the list, something to aim for, but also it brings attention to the hospitality world, and it reminds people how important restaurants, bars, hotels are. But in this case, we're talking mainly about restaurants. How important restaurants are as part of society, as part of culture, and as part of a community. Often the centers of communities. Food is fundamental to all of us, and bringing people together around the table is fundamental to society and culture. So, without sounding too highfalutin about it, it's more than just those restaurants that make it onto the list. It's about celebrating the hospitality sector per se, in its entirety. By shining a light, and of course we create a ranking. There's a degree of competition with that, but what that brings is attention to the world, media attention, discussion, debate about whether this restaurant should be considered better than that restaurant. But that's all a device to, um, yeah, do what I just said, which is bring attention to the hospitality world. I think that's a really important kind of subtext of what we're about.
Let's talk about best. Um, because I mean, like if there was ever a subjective word, best would be it. Most would be probably a close second. I would assume that like you guys have gone to painstaking effort over the years to clearly define best. But then I would also assume, at least over the last 10 years, I mean, Jesus, like over the last 10 years, the word best has probably been redefined 1,000 times based on everything that's happened in the world. And so I would ask you, like, how was best defined when you first started? And what has that evolution been like over time?
It's a really interesting question, Josh, because we probably go the other way from that, and that we deliberately don't define best. We say best is whatever is best for you. And what we mean by that is that we have 1,120 expert voters around the world who are voting on the world's 50 best restaurants, anonymously, independently, and confidentially. Each of those voters has a different view, of course, of they've had different experiences. What they consider best is up to them. So for some people, the wine pairing that they might have with this incredible menu is super important. For other people, they don't drink. They're not interested in the wine. They're all about the food. For some people, it's about the atmosphere and the ambience. And for most people, it's about a combination of all those things. But for they dial up and dial down depending on different tastes. And taste is ultimately deeply subjective. So we don't try and define what we mean by best. What we do is ask those experts to name their best restaurant experiences. Simple as that. And then we collate the votes. So when we create a list of the world's best restaurants, of course, there's an acknowledgement that it's subjective. It's the subjective views of a collective of 1,120 people. So that means that the best is never defined. That said, your question about how that's changed is still relevant in that those experts which are a reflection of consumers as a whole and diners as a whole are more interested in different things over time. So the reputation, what that restaurant is doing behind the scenes, how it treats its team, what its sustainability ethos is, how it sources its products, what it, how they conduct themselves in the world becomes more important and has become much more important, especially as you mentioned, post-pandemic. It's become much more important, especially how we treat people, both internally and externally, both how we treat our customers, but also how we treat our suppliers, how we treat people, full stop, how we treat our staff. So that's definitely been a change, but we don't tell people what is how to define best. They decide that for themselves.
So like it's very Rick Rubin esque. Did you see the interview where Rick Rubin was like, they're like, you don't play an instrument. Like, what do people pay you for? And he's like, people pay me for my taste. So which is incredible, right? And has obviously served Rick Rubin very
Hopefully, we've
well.
got 1,120 Rick Rubins out there, all different, of course, but with that kind of level of taste and expertise.
And so, but I mean, then I would assume that because there's got to be something concrete. So, like, how do you define an expert? How, because if you're depending on like the palate and the ethos
Mm.
of these experts, how do you find an expert and where do you source them
Yeah,
from?
we find many different ones. We devolve that power, that selection process to our 28 academy chairs who are the heads of our voting in different regions. So to take an example that's more relevant to the US, we have 3 different academy chairs across the US and Canada, but we divide it east to west. So we have someone doing Western US and Western Canada. So Vancouver, British Columbia, down through California, and Washington, Portland, Oregon, all the way down to Mexico, and some of the states inland a little bit. Now, they will find 40 voters for the world's 50 best restaurants based in that region. Those voters are, some of them are chefs and restaurateurs, some of them are food writers and broadcasters and critics. Some of them are what we call well-traveled gastronomes or gourmets who may not be in any of the previous categories. They may be a CEO of a tech firm, but they travel regularly and eat regularly, and we consider them experts because they have a well-rounded experience of good restaurants through their professional opportunities and their personal taste. So we have this mix of different people, all of whom, of course, have different palates because every single one of us has a different palate and a different view on what they enjoy. And we collectively bring those votes together. So there's no definition of what makes an expert. We are collectively bringing together expert opinion, and it kind of works. I mean, it's been running for 22 years. It creates a list. The list always generates debate and discussion, and that's important. That's part of what we're about. No two people will agree on what their best restaurant experience is. That's quite rare, and certainly everyone will discuss whether that restaurant should be higher in the ranking. That restaurant, I went to that restaurant and I didn't think it was great, but it's number 48. Why is it on there? And so forth. But that's fine. That's kind of part of what it's about, to create this discussion and debate. And we think that's healthy. So we don't define what's best. We don't define exactly what makes an expert. We have various kind of guidelines in that. But it evolves in that we have at least 25% of the voting panel changes every year to ensure that there's a dynamic and a freshness to it. And overall, that creates the list that has become arguably the most important gastronomic ranking in global gastronomy.
One more question as it relates to this. To get into college here in the States, you'll take an ACT as an example. And so, like, the ACT is supposed to be like a general test that evaluates like how much you learned in high school, how well prepared you are for college. But then out of that comes all of these classes and all of these tutors that will teach you how to test well. And so, one of the things that we've seen in the industry, especially as it relates to higher end dining, is that people are trying to get good at the test in order to rank, right? That people are trying to reverse engineer a spot on the world's 50 best. They're trying to reverse engineer a spot in the Michelin guide, right? If I want to get a bib gourmand, these are the 3 things I need to do, right? How am I going to get 1 star without a tasting menu? So people are actually reverse engineering the outcome, or at least attempting to. And in some way, that has probably irrevocably impacted the industry in the way that restaurateurs create restaurants, create menus, run restaurants. Talk to me about, like, as an outsider peering in, as someone that exerts some level of influence over this, where you see that as a good thing and how you see it as a bad thing.
Okay. I would say that I would never encourage any restaurant to make that a focus, whether it be for any ranking, whether it be the Michelin Guide, the world's 50 best restaurants, or any other ranking, whether it be the local critics coming in on the local newspaper or website. So for me, the best restaurants will always focus on their diners first. Now, that sounds obvious and a little bit trite, but oh my goodness, it really is true when you get into the restaurant world, because those, and there are many, you will hear about some restaurants that maybe have got onto the list and they've really had an ambition to do so. But what you don't hear about is the hundreds or thousands of restaurants that are trying to do that and then taking that eye off the diner and thinking about the critic or the voter or the judges instead, whether it be a James Beard committee or an anonymous 50 best judge or a Michelin inspector. It's That's totally the wrong way to go about your business. Now, of course, because you need to see these accolades as a byproduct of your core day-to-day business, which is serving your customers in the best possible way that you can do. And that might be a really creative tasting menu, or it might be a bistro serving exactly what they want when they want it at any time of day or night, or a diner. I mean, whatever your business is, you've got to believe in it, and you've got to drive that home and not be looking for the accolades and rankings. Now, if they come on the side, or if you feel them coming, that's great, and that's a great recognition for the team often. And of course, it can be good for business. But if you go about seeking that in order to get that business, you're going about it the wrong way. And it's a deeply flawed business strategy to go about that way. So I would actively discourage that. And any consultants or PR companies that are saying I can help you do this, that you should be able to see them coming and say, look, I can help you market and your restaurant for sure. That's their job. Understood. But if they're saying I can get you onto the list, I would take that with a large pinch of salt.
You've been with the company so long at this point, and you've been an active participant and architect in it for so long. I'm wondering, like, what trends you've seen. So, like, over the last 10 years, like, it's certainly not cookie cutter. It's not like the same 50 every year. It's not the same type of restaurant in the 50 every year. How do you believe the list has evolved with, like, consumer trends, consumer preference, with the market?
Yeah, I mean the list it's a reflection of what's going on in the food world across the world, and there's no one trend and one movement. But I guess there are a few key things that I've seen over the last 10 years. Some of them may seem obvious. The first is the casualization of premium dining. So that means that what used to be called fine dining has evolved. Whether we can even call it fine dining is questionable. I don't really like the term because it has the whiff of the white tablecloth and the formal sommelier who's looking down at you from on high. And that's no longer the case in the best restaurants in the world, and nor should it be. As in, you can have a extraordinarily detailed and intentional and high level dining experience, but with a very down to earth casual service style. The two are not incompatible. Formality is not luxury. So that's changed because even when I started 15 years ago, the high end restaurants in the world almost invariably had a very formal service style. It was done by the book, the rules. But restaurants like 11 Madison Park in New York changed that, helped change that. Not alone, of course, but they were a pioneer of change that because they didn't have those rules. And it was an extraordinary detail-oriented restaurant, but they also were engaging on a human level. And they helped change the game, as did Danny Meyer and others. So that's really interesting. We've seen more and more of that, and that's filtered down into the industry as a whole. Um, One of the other key things I think we've seen is the end of the hegemony of French cuisine as a dominant force in global gastronomy. Now, that is no disrespect to French culinary heritage, and the influence of French cuisine is still the biggest in the world. So, no, I'm not denying that, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's just not the only player in town anymore. There used to be that if you were going at high end, it was still pretty much French. Even some of the best Japanese restaurants in the world, which has this long centuries old history of incredible food, but it was still a lot of them were still looked to France. That doesn't happen anymore. You see what's happening in Latin America, what's happening in Mexico, what's happening in Peru, what's happening in parts of Asia, in Thailand, in China as well, and of course in Japan, where those cuisines are getting the respect that they deserve independently and on their own. And that's not, as I say, that French and European cuisine is not still important. It's just that other cuisines are important and influential as well. And again, we almost take that for granted now, but that wasn't the case even a decade ago to nearly the same degree. And the third one I just mentioned is sustainability. That sounds like a bit of a cliche, but what I emphasize is human sustainability. We touched on this a bit earlier. It's about the emphasis on people as part of the hospitality world, and we're not people behind closed doors producing this extraordinary luxury experience for the diner, and you don't care or know about what goes on to produce that. People are interested, and we as an industry are interested in what goes into this, to the extent that we want to know who the producer is. We want to know that producer is being paid a fair price. We want to know how the vegetables are being harvested, or the animals are being reared, or the fish are being sourced, so and so forth. So we're really interested in that. We're also interested in how well the team is being treated, and how many, if they're working crazy hours, and all that kind of stuff. So the human sustainability factor is not become an add-on. It's become central to the world of hospitality.
We live in a world with so many choices. And like as a professional marketer and somebody that coaches independent restaurants, one of the things I talk about all the time is like people don't need more choice. Like decision fatigue is a very, very real thing. We make 1,000 choices a day as is. And, to illustrate that, you look at like the highest echelons of dining. And in the highest echelons of dining, you choose nothing. It is all chosen for you, right? Like a 3-star Michelin experience. You're not sitting down and they're saying, "So, Will, what are you hungry for today?" And so that is very much represented in the 50 best. But the other thing that I see in the 50 best that I think is very interesting is hyper-personalization.
Mm.
And I think it would be a mistake to not talk about it, because what we are seeing is that through the ability to collect data and diner preferences and all of these things, is that even though this is the best imaginable experience of this restaurant as defined by the restaurateur and the chef, it is hyper personalized to the person they're sitting in front of. And this is a relatively new evolution. Are you seeing that as well?
Yes, it's a really interesting balance to find, I think, Josh, because to your first point, there's nothing more luxurious in a way than not having to choose. So that's
Yes.
especially if they get it right for you, which is hyper personalization, right? So if someone's coming to you and going, "I know what you want," I mean, it's almost like when you go into a bar and they're going, "Not, I'm going to give you your usual because you always have a martini or you always have an old fashioned." They're going, Josh, it's 11 p.m. on a Friday night. I'm going to give you this because I think that's what you want. I know you've had a tough, you've been in service in the restaurant, or it's 6 p.m. or it's 1 p.m. on a Wednesday. I'm going to give you this. So, they that's brilliant. That's a brilliant piece of hyper personalization that has existed for decades in the best restaurants and bars, right? But data gives people more of an opportunity to do that, and technology gives more people more of an opportunity to do that. And let's embrace the fear that we will have. AI will give people an opportunity to do that as well. However, counteracting that is the fact that we're all humans, and the human element cannot be underestimated. So you could have a menu that is absolutely perfect for you on that occasion, in that exactly right, exactly the right balance, right nutritional balance, because it's all been calculated. They know your taste. They can almost tell how hungry you are, or how much whether you do want a dessert or not. All of that stuff they might be able to tell, but really your enjoyment of that food is going to be dictated in part by how you feel when you're eating it, and how you feel when you're eating it is dictated by so many human factors: how the people serving you are, what the atmosphere in the room is, who you're with, and how they feel. As we all know, when something goes wrong and you don't feel comfortable, you just can't enjoy your meal in the same way. Your food literally does not taste as good. Whereas when everything's good, the suggestive forces are working, you're in a good place mentally, and you're with good people, that food literally tastes so much better. So all of that means that there's a human element and a human sort of, if you like, flexibility that we all have, that the same food can taste different in different moments. is a positive for me, because that says the human part of it is still really important, and you cannot computize, if that's the word, the dining experience to that extent. It can help, and people will use it hopefully in the right way to help hyper personalize your experience to make it more attuned to you. But you still got to have humans reading you at that time, going, do they want another glass of wine, or not?
Let's talk about the muddying of the waters. You look at the 50 best 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and it was French restaurants, right? And then it was Italian restaurants, and it was Mexican restaurants, and it was Japanese restaurants. And there's been this great muddying of the waters where cuisines are now blending together, and fusion, which was seen as this like neophyte, low end, weird thing that hippies do and flip flops, is now reached the highest echelons of dining. Talk to me about how you've seen cultures and cuisines blend in a way that's actually pushing the industry forward.
I think it's always been there, actually. I think fusion's always existed in different forms. I mean, all of our cuisines, all of our cultures are fusions, right? I mean, American culture is almost the ultimate example of even you include indigenous uh, culture within that, and then all the immigration that's gone in the United States. I mean, it's everything is a fusion. So even, I don't know, American food, of course, that's a fusion by its very nature.
For sure.
But even Mexican food in the States, or French food in the States, is going to take influences from different cultures. French food, as we know it now, has been influenced by different things over the centuries in France, because France has not, it been had lots of different invasions and immigrations and so on. So there's no such thing as a sort of pure cuisine. I think we're kidding ourselves if we think that. It's always gone on. Of course, the modern world of easy travel, and even more importantly, uh, communication across the world and instantaneous communication across the world means that we know as much about what's going on in Chinese cuisine as we might do in French cuisine or American cuisine at any given time, because it's all on social media and so forth. So people, I say, we know as much. We think we know as much, or we have that access to different elements through visuals and so forth, and education. So there's a degree of everything's sped up, but it doesn't take away from the fact that we've always had elements of fusion, even if it's going a bit faster now. It just, for a while, it was a kind of dirty word, but that was to do with certain manifestations of fusion which weren't particularly great. But there's always been that. There's always been good food, not such good food out there, and that will always be the case as well. So it's interesting. I think there's actually a move further back the other way towards indigenous foods and indigenous ingredients and locality and heritage more so. That heritage is not about purity. That heritage may well have all sorts of different historical influences within it, but it depends how far you look back. So everything's a mixture.
Success leaves clues. It's a great quote that I don't know who said it. But what I can tell you is I'm it like 500 and something episodes of this show. And it's irrevocably altered my worldview on this industry. Because a large sample size is very compelling. And so what you see is, you interview enough successful people, and over time you figure out that there are these common threads. And you have had the same good fortune, which is to be in the orbit of some of the most successful restaurateurs, hoteliers, hospitality professionals in the world for 15 years. Um, what do you see? What are the common threads amongst some of the best owners and operators in the world?
That's a great question, because the the common threads are kind of few and far between, because they're so diverse and different in terms of personalities and and the way different people operate and their cultural background and so forth. What would I see? Of course, a determination and drive. You know that getting being successful in this business is far from easy for anyone at whatever level. it's a tough, it's a tight margin industry, period. It's a tight margin industry. So to then survive and to add creativity to that survival is much easier said than done. So a determination, a sense of resilience, and a self-belief is one of those key factors. You have to have a stubborn streak to get to the very top, because you probably have to believe in yourself to that nth degree to keep going down your path, irrespective of what others might say, because it's never a safe option. But getting to the top of any profession is the non-safe option. Being in the middle and maybe making yourself a decent living and looking after your family and so on, that's the option that most people take, and that's great. That's exactly what most of us take, right? But there are those outliers who want to really push the boundaries and get to the top. So they have to have that stubborn streak combined with creativity and resilience, and the combination is difficult to find. The most creative people are not necessarily the most resilient always. I mean, I'm generalizing, but so it's when those two things come together. So of creativity, a sense of innovation, but also that determination and resilience to ride the ups and downs that will inevitably happen if you work in the hospitality sector for an extended period.
Let's talk about return on luck. So, in the book, Good to Great by Jim Collins, one of the things that he talks about is, the most successful companies in the world simply have a higher return on luck than anyone else on the planet. When when I started my fine dining restaurant, we had no Michelin aspirations because Michelin wasn't in California. So it wasn't even a consideration. And then when we found out they were coming to town, we didn't think we would be considered. And then we get an email, which we thought was spam, but turned out was true. And you flash forward like 30, 60, 90 days. And we were like, if we don't get this, we're going to die. Um, but and look, we achieved a Michelin accolade during a time that I think between the bibs and the stars, 80 plus restaurants in the state of California did. What I think we did better than most was we had a higher return on luck. Is that we took that opportunity and we used that as the lens through which we more properly marketed the restaurant, which got us access to a wider audience and more people that cared about that thing for longer. I share that because, you guys have got, how many? If I was to do the quick math, 750 past winners at least. And so, and they have all done good, great, terrible jobs trying to get mileage out of that. For the ones that have made the most of the opportunity, what have you seen?
Yeah, you want them, yes, to utilize it, but not to focus too much. It goes back to the original thing about not seeking the accolade. If you then get the accolade and you're like, right, how am I going to use this? What are we going to do now? Again, slightly the wrong approach to it. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't use it, but that's not your primary focus. Your primary focus is how do we get better? How do we get better? And how do we live up to people's expectations? You will know that if you get a Michelin star or something, or if you come on the 50 best list, expectations go up. You'll get diners coming in from a wider geographical sphere. You get diners coming in with greater expectations. So you might think, oh, maybe I can raise my prices a bit. Yeah, maybe you can. You've also, everyone's expectations are raised. So you've got to immediately, your first thing is to be right. How are we going to get better? How are we going to not live up to this but exceed expectations? If you go in with that approach, then you'll build on the accolades and the success that you have, rather than feeling like the accolades are, this is what I deserve anyway, finally, therefore now it's going to come rolling in, my life's sorted, I've achieved it, done. If you take that attitude, you're probably going to be closed in a few years' time. So, it's a harsh industry. We know that, right? So, I think those people that have succeeded are those people that, again, have not focused on that, or used it as a driver and a motivator, as fuel for the next stage.
Let's look forward. So, award season is upon us again, my friend. What are you most excited about? What do you think is going to surprise people most about this year's list?
For me, it's
It's
always
a
award season, but no,
very
you're
true.
right. You're right. Uh, the World's 50 Best Restaurants 2025 reveal. We just revealed today the extended list from 51 to 100. Very exciting. Almost for me, one of the most exciting lists to reveal because it often includes the upcomers, the next generation of amazing restaurants that that will many of which will be on the 50 best list itself in the future. So that's really exciting. In 2 weeks' time, on the 19th of June, we reveal the world's 50 best restaurants 2025 itself in Turin, live in Turin, Italy, and we're very excited about it, in part because we're hosting the event in Italy for the first time in our 23-year history. Italy is a wonderful home to food and drink. Also, for me, the heart of hospitality. I mean, in terms of that sense of giving and warm welcome and embracing people through food and drink. Italy is one of the heartland of that in many ways. Um, so we're really excited to do that. What can we expect? Always expect the unexpected. It's exciting. There'll be new award winners. I'm sure there'll be surprises. I can't tell you any more than that because I will be giving away stuff. But yeah, hopefully today's announcement was a good precursor, if you like, a teaser for what will come in a couple of weeks.
Beyond the list, what are the stories that you're tracking, the trends that you're seeing that you think are going to define the industry over the next decade?
I wouldn't claim to know what those are going to be because it's always evolving in surprising ways. Um, but I think further to some of the points we've touched on earlier, we're going to see a more diverse restaurant world. We have been a white male dominated world. I mean, obviously that's not global. In Asia, it's Asia dominated, but it's still been a massive European influence that has not been reciprocated the other way round as much. Interestingly, in the US, you're seeing this already. Some of the greatest restaurants in the US are um, serving Korean food or Japanese food or a mixture of different food or Mexican food and many others. I mean, again, it goes back to one of the points we made earlier about the nature of the US and its history. But you see Atomix in New York, just to take an obvious example that's been on the world's 50 best restaurants list in ascendancy for a number of years. This is an extraordinary restaurant, um, and it's not they're not Korean Americans running it. They're actually Koreans who've relatively recently moved, but there are plenty of Korean Americans as well, American Koreans, and so forth. And in a restaurant in LA like Kato, with the background that John has, fascinating to see. But that is happening more around the world in the sense of we are not seeing white male chefs dominate the global gastronomic scene, or we will not in the same way they have done in the last 10, 20 years.
Are you worried about the economic pressures as it relates to this particular tier of dining? I think you look at Cato, you look at John, and you hear, I mean, from him specifically as an example in articles about just how impossible it is to run these restaurants, how like to create a restaurant that is one of the 50, I mean, think there are what, like 22.4 million restaurants in the world, and to create one of the 50 best, and it's still not an economically sound investment. Does
It's
that give you pause?
yes, of course, but at the same time, because we're part of the hospitality sector, so we feel it. But at all levels. I mean, it's not that's not just at the top end. It's also at every level, right?
100%.
There's pressure, and every situation and economic situation of every sort of business setup and financial setup is different. So you can't make sweeping judgments about it. But we do know that the economic situation across the world is tough by and large, and that's the hospitality sector suffers. So it's not and almost never has been an easy place to make money.
For
I
sure.
mean, that's not how it works, right? So At the same time, the creativity and the resilience, and we saw this in the pandemic, the resilience and the agility of the hospitality sector was pretty extraordinary. I mean, and the givingness, the amount that the hospitality sector gave to other people during that period when people were, going hungry or in trouble, how much the hospitality sector wanted to serve, wanted to feed people, wanted to look after people, because that's what the nature of the people that work in it, that's what they do. That was extraordinary. I was witness to that, and felt privileged to be so, and really surprised many people how it turned. Also trying to stay alive themselves as a business, but at the same time it's helping other people, because that's what they do. They feed other people. So that says to me that long term, the there will always be a place for extraordinary dining experiences, because people will adapt, and the style of those experiences might change, and the economic models will have to shift, and they are always shifting. But there is a demand for extraordinary experiences at whatever level, whether it be the best taco in San Diego or the best 15-course tasting menu in San Diego. They are both still going to be in demand. Of course, if you're the 20th best tasting menu or the 20th best taco, you might struggle.
There are a bunch of independent owners and operators listening today that maybe or maybe they don't aspire to be on any list anywhere, but there's certainly something that they can learn from the people that have made it onto those lists. And again, like what I find most fascinating, Will, is your sample size. Is it's absolutely massive. And so kind of chunking down for the folks that are listening in their particular use case, what have you learned that you think would serve them well from working with, the best restaurants on the planet?
Yeah, I mean, I would still go back to the almost the same answer, which is focus on your diners. Now, that doesn't mean you give the diners exactly what the diners demand, because you might be giving the diners something that they don't know they want yet. As in, when you're giving someone a tasting menu for the first time, maybe you start out and you're an a la carte restaurant, but on a Friday night you're offering a tasting menu. Maybe that works because some people are going, "Oh my God, this is really great." Maybe you then offer the tasting menu on a Friday and Saturday night. Maybe you're offering the tasting menu only on the Friday night. The a la carte's not available, but it's available for lunch. All those, you can ease your way in, but so it's not about always listening to diner's demands, but it is about serving the diner at all times. So that means you can take them on a journey with you. Is the point I was trying to make. So, um, but if you serving the diners in the best way you can, and that could be in a super creative, I'm going to take my guests on this extraordinary journey that I believe in. That you're still serving the diner, even if you're not serving them ketchup because they demand ketchup with their whatever it is you're serving. So just to clarify, I don't mean you do everything they want you to do in that moment. But I think that's really important, that you're thinking about your diners versus thinking about yourself and your own creativity first. That doesn't mean you can't be creative, but there are many chefs who want to show off what they do for themselves or for their peer group rather than for the diners. That's the wrong way to look at it. And the same thing about if they're trying to show off to any guide or inspector or voter or judge. The same thing. So you've still got to keep focused on the business side, which is you looking after your diners in whatever form that takes, whatever iteration that takes. So I think that's really crucial. To get to the very top, there is no recipe. There's literally no recipe for how to do it. And anyone that tells you there's a recipe to get on a list or to get 3 Michelin stars, that's all bullshit. There is no recipe. There are lots of things that I'm sure that you shouldn't be doing, but it's people are always asking what you should be doing, and there's no recipe for that. You've got to have your own vision, not someone else's template. You've got to have your own vision and follow your own vision, and hope that you get the requisite recognition as a result.